At a road bend in Prague on May 27, 1942, the car carrying Reinhard Heydrich slows exactly where the attackers need it to. Joseph Gabčík steps into the road, raises a Sting gun from beneath his jacket, and pulls the trigger. But the gun jams. Heydrich is one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany. As acting Reich protector of the Nazi-occupied Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia, he has earned the nickname the Butcher of Prague through arrests, executions, and martial law. That is why he is marked for assassination. But the mission is precarious from the start. To get this close to Heydrich, the attackers had to operate inside Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, relying on a resistance network already under severe pressure. If the attack fails, the mission collapses. If it succeeds, massive reprisals will follow. How did the attackers get close enough to strike Heydrich, and what did their strike unleash? The attack only makes sense once you see how the mission was assembled, who was sent, and how quickly it started to go wrong. In late 1941, František Moravec, the Czech intelligence officer organizing the operation from London, selects Joseph Gabčík and Anton Svoboda for the mission and briefs them himself. The task is clear. Enter occupied Czechoslovakia and strike Heydrich. The mission is kept from the Czech resistance, not because local help would be useless, but because the underground resistance is already too compromised to trust with something this sensitive. Before the flight even leaves the ground, the mission hits its first serious obstacle. Svoboda is badly concussed in a practice jump and can no longer continue. So Moravec turns to Jan Kubiš, a soldier Gabčík already knows and trusts, and rebuilds the team around the two of them. They are trained for a close attack on Heydrich's car, but the final place and timing of it are key decisions that still have to be finalized when they are on the ground. Then comes the flight into occupied Czechoslovakia. On the night of December 28th to 29th, 1941, Gabčík and Kubiš were meant to parachute in near Borek Aerodrome by Plzeň, approximately 120 kilometers to the west of Prague, but instead they landed in Nevězdy, some 30 kilometers east of the city. So the arranged reception plan is useless as soon as they land. But that is only the first problem. Gabčík injures his ankle on landing, so the attack has to wait. First, the two men have to remain hidden and get to Prague. A local gamekeeper and a miller help connect them to resistance contacts there, and shortly after the new year, they reach the city by train. But that help substantially increases the risk to the operation, as it now depends on more people, more movement, and therefore provides more chances for exposure. Once they reach Prague, the next phase of the operation is to establish Heydrich's routine. Gabčík and Kubiš begin tracking Heydrich's movements between Prague, Panenské Březiny, where Heydrich's residence is, and the airport, trying to learn when and how he travels and where he is most exposed. They build that picture through local help, using resistance contacts and information from a worker linked to Heydrich's residence. In early April, Joseph Valchik is brought into the mission as an extra man. He is a parachutist from Silver a separate team sent in to restore radio contact with London after Gestapo arrests and transmitter seizures had severed communications. The first real option they explore is the road near Panenské Březiny. The plan there is to stop or crash Heydrich's car with a steel cable and then attack with guns and grenades. But the problem is escape. The guards are close, the roads are exposed, and the men have no reliable way out. So the plan is rejected. They eventually settle on the Lieben Bend in Prague. There, the road forces Heydrich's car to slow down, which makes a close ambush far easier. A nearby tram and bus stop also allows the men to wait in place without standing out in the open. As the attack plan is being finalized, other parachute missions are already being foiled, and resistance contacts are being arrested by the Gestapo. So the attack plan on Heydrich is progressing, while the network around it is being broken up. The men now have a place to strike, but less time to wait. There is no room for delay. But as the ambush plan moves closer to execution, the Czech resistance then tries to stop it. Those helping the mission now believe that killing Heydrich will trigger severe reprisals against the resistance and the wider civilian population. So a warning is transmitted to London, urging that the operation be called off before it is too late. London receives the warning on May 12th, but by then, the message is no longer clean. The original protest had accepted that if foreign policy made the assassination essential, the nation would bear the cost. But when the message is transmitted, that final line is softened into a call for another target instead. 2 days later, Moravec replies that actions against officials of the German Reich do not come into consideration. That reply seems to point away from an attack on Heydrich, but no direct order comes back canceling the mission. So the mission proceeds. At approximately 10:32 a.m. on May 27, 1942, the ambush is set on the road toward the Troja Bridge in Holešovice, where tram tracks run up the center and the road turns through a tight bend. Valchik waits on a corner about 300 yards farther up the road, watching for Heydrich's Mercedes with a mirror to signal the others. Kubiš stands on the left side of the ambush point with a grenade, partly hidden by a lamppost and trees, while Gabčík waits near the tram stop just off the corner, with a Sten gun hidden under his coat. When Heydrich's Mercedes appears, Valchik flashes the mirror signal. Gabčík then steps into the road in front of the car, raises the weapon, and pulls the trigger. But the gun jams. Heydrich is in the front passenger seat, beside his driver Johannes Klein. When the Sten jams, he reacts immediately. Instead of escaping the bend, Heydrich stands up, draws his pistol, and orders Klein to stop. The car brakes in front of Gabčík, so Kubiš steps out and throws the grenade. It explodes against the rear of the Mercedes, driving fragments into Heydrich's body and shrapnel back into Kubiš's face. But when the blast clears, Heydrich is still alive. Immediately after the blast, the attackers scatter. Kubiš escapes on his bicycle while bleeding from the face. Gabčík runs, then shoots Klein when the driver pursues him on foot and escapes through the side streets to a safe house. Valchik had already pocketed the mirror, slipped down a side road, and escaped by tram. Heydrich is still alive, but collapses beside the car. A young woman and an off-duty Czech policeman stop a passing vehicle, bundle Heydrich in, and get him to Bulovka Hospital. The attackers escape not knowing whether they have killed Heydrich or only set in motion the brutal reprisals that were feared all along. Heydrich reaches Bulovka Hospital alive just after 11 a.m. He is conscious and able to speak, but the X-ray reveals deeper injuries: a broken rib, a ruptured diaphragm, and fragments of shrapnel and horsehair from the car's upholstery driven deep into his spleen. He refuses treatment from the first doctor and instead demands a surgeon from Berlin, but later agrees to an operation by a German surgeon based in Prague. Shortly after midday, he is taken into surgery, and when it ends, doctors believe he may survive. Publicly, the Nazi regime says Heydrich's injuries are not life-threatening, but privately, Prague is sealed off, and the greatest manhunt in the history of the Third Reich begins. Gestapo units, Order Police, SS, Czech gendarmes, and 3 Wehrmacht battalions, more than 12,000 men in total, search around 36,000 buildings. Around 500 people are arrested in the first sweep alone, and a reward of 10 million crowns is offered for their attackers. Anyone aged 15 and over is ordered to register with the police, and anyone who recognizes but fails to report the assassins or who shelters them will be shot along with their families. Even the country's 7,000 doctors are forced to swear that they have not treated an injured man matching the descriptions of the suspects. Meanwhile, Heydrich's condition worsens. The wound becomes infected, and he slips into a coma. On June 4th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague, dies. The uncertainty over the ambush is over. Now the full reprisals will begin. The wrath of the German response is swift and brutal. Hitler reacts to Heydrich's death with fury and demands blood. By the time Heydrich dies, 157 people have already been executed, but later came the shocking events at Leditsu. The village was already under suspicion because two families there had sons serving with Czech forces in Britain. But then a coincidental letter helped seal the village's fate. Václav Žiha had written to his lover at her workplace. Her employer, suspecting it was a coded letter and being a Nazi sympathizer, intercepted it, and it was passed to the Gestapo. In the letter, Žiha said he had to disappear for a while, and the wording made it sound as if he knew Josef Horak, who was a resident of Leditsu. It was not evidence, but it gave the Gestapo a further suspicion about the village. Shortly after 9:30 on the evening of June 9th, Leditsu was surrounded. The villagers were rounded up, and the men were shot in groups. The women were deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp, while the children were taken away and assessed for potential Germanization through forced adoption into German SS families. Only a handful of children were eventually deemed suitable, so most were later murdered. All the houses were burned, the ruins bulldozed, and the village was erased. As the death lists and informers kept growing, the next break would not come from the street. It would come from within. The man who broke was Karol Czurda, a parachutist from a separate sabotage mission dropped into Czechoslovakia in late March 1942. He had not been involved in the ambush, and he did not know the assassins' current hiding place. But he knew enough of the resistance network around them to still pose a danger. He could identify helpers and trace the safe house links that had kept them hidden. Under the pressure of German reprisals and the threat of action against his family, he cracked. First, he sent an anonymous letter to the police chief of a nearby town, naming Kubiš and Gabčík as Heydrich's killers. Then, on June 16th, he went to the Gestapo headquarters at the Paycheck Palace to provide further information. Czurda's betrayal gave the Gestapo a route into the safe house network. One of its key links was the Moravec family flat in Žižkov, not the family of the man directing the operation from London, but a separate Prague household that had sheltered Gabčík and Kubiš for weeks. As the huge manhunt made Prague's apartments unusable, Jan Zelenka, a resistance organizer responsible for safe houses and false papers, began moving the parachutists out of the city's safe houses and into the crypt of St. Cyril and Methodius Church. Therefore, the Moravec family knew that the fugitives had been moved to the church. On June 17th, their flat was raided. Marie Moravec used a hidden cyanide capsule rather than be taken alive. Alois Moravec and his son Vlastimil were taken away by the Gestapo. At Paycheck Palace, Vlastimil was tortured for hours, shown his mother's severed head, and told his father would die the same way. He broke and gave up the church link. The hideout was now exposed. In the early hours of June 18th, 1942, around 800 SS men surrounded the church, hoping to take the assassins alive and use them to further break the wider resistance network. Inside the church were 7 parachutists, Gabčík, Kubiš, Valčík, the 3 men that had attacked Heydrich, and Opalka, Schwarz, Hruby, and Bublik, parachutists from other Allied operations. The sources are not completely clear on the exact position of each man, but Kubiš and Opalka were 2 of the 3 men posted in the church above ground, while Gabčík was among 4 men hiding in the crypt beneath the church. Before daybreak, the Germans forced entry. The men above opened fire from the choir and gallery and held off the assault for nearly 2 hours. But by about 7 a.m., the upper defense had collapsed. 1 defender was dead. Kubiš and the other surviving defender were badly wounded and captured. Kubiš was taken alive to the SS military hospital, where he later died without regaining consciousness. At first, the Germans thought the church had been cleared, but then they found clothing in the choir that did not belong to the dead and wounded men upstairs, and they realized more parachutists were still hiding. A more thorough search then uncovered the trapdoor to the crypt. Under pressure, Father Vladimir Petrek, the Orthodox priest who had helped shelter the parachutists, admitted that more men were inside. Petrek, Karol Czurda, and Vlastimil Moravec were then forced to the church at gunpoint and made to call down into the crypt for the men to surrender. But the response from the crypt was gunfire. From that point on, the battle focused on the crypt. It only had 3 points of access: a trapdoor under a flagstone by the church's west door, a larger entrance near the altar that had been bricked up, and a ventilation shaft opening through an iron grill. The Germans tried loudspeaker promises first, offering prisoner of war treatment if the men surrendered, but nothing came back except more gunfire. So firefighters then knocked out the grill and pumped around 660 gallons of water a minute into the crypt. At first, the defenders used a ladder inside the crypt to reach the vent, cut the hoses, or shove them back out. But a fireman spotted the ladder through the opening, grabbed it, and the SS hauled it away. After that, the men below could no longer reach the vent 12 feet above their heads to stop the flooding. Grenades were then thrown in to stop them clearing the hoses. Karl Hermann Frank, the state secretary in Czechoslovakia, arrived, lost patience with the stalled siege, and demanded the crypt be taken by force. SS soldiers then pushed in through the west door entrance, fought forwards through gas and rising water, but were beaten back in the dark. So explosives were laid at the bricked-up altar entrance to enlarge the breach and launch a final two-sided assault. But before it could begin, 4 shots were heard from inside the crypt. The defenders had chosen death over capture. The last shots in the crypt ended the battle, but the killing did not stop there. The dead parachutists were identified and displayed as proof that Heydrich's assassins were dead. Then the Germans moved against the people who had made the attack possible. Bishop Gorazd, head of the Orthodox Church in Prague, and Father Vladimir Petschek were arrested and later executed. Vlastimil Moravec's forced confession did not save him. He and his father were sent to Mauthausen concentration camp, where both later died. Churda was paid by the Germans for his betrayal, changed his name, took German citizenship, and spent the rest of the occupation working for the Gestapo as a spy. After the war, he was arrested by the Czechs and hung for high treason. That was how the story ended for the men who led the Germans to the church, but the mission itself had still worked. Heydrich was dead, and the Czech government in exile had shown it could still strike one of the most powerful men in Hitler's Reich. But that success came with executions, Leditsu, and the collapse of the network behind the attack. Operation Anthropoid ended with success and catastrophe arriving together. And if you want to find out what happened to the rest of Hitler's inner circle, click the video on screen.